Hello everybody, good evening and welcome to the Eastside Asian Pacific Islander Candidates Forum. Let's give yourselves a round of applause. This event is sponsored by 16 API and other organizations. My name is Anila Afzali, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Muslim Empowerment Network, a new initiative of the Muslim Association of Puget Sound, and I will be your moderator for the evening. I would like to start by introducing Lalita Upala, who is hosting this event here tonight.
Welcome everyone to North Bellevue Community Center on behalf of the India Association of Western Washington. Before I start, I would really like to give a warm thank you to the City of Bellevue, which has invited us, the India Association, to do a pop-up community center right here every Thursday, all 52 weeks of the year. So thank you, Bellevue. I would like other members of the planning committee to come over and stand here and state their name and organizations.
Okay. You go first.
Hi, my name is Kemi Matsumoto, and I'm representing APACE votes, C3 and APACE, or C4.
I'm Sheldon Arakaki, and I'm representing the Seattle chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League. And I'm Ellery Bien, representing Eastside Asian Pacific Islanders.
And as Anila said, I'm Lalita Upala, and I'm the director for the India Association's community program. I also would like to acknowledge all the API candidate forum co-sponsors. We have the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. We have, and if you can hold your applause till the end, we have Asian Counseling and Referral Service, the ACRS. We have the Asian Pacific Islander American for Civic Empowerment. We have APACE votes, Chinese Information and Services Center, CISC, India Association of Western Washington, IAWW, Indo-American Friendship Forum, IAFF, International Community Health Services, ICHS, Interim CDA, Japanese American Citizens League, the JACL, Korean American Coalition, MAPS, the American Muslim Empowerment Network, Organization of Chinese Americans, Planned Parenthood, the SWEDE, and Washington State India Trade Relations Action Committee. These are all the co-sponsors, and the Women's Political Caucus. Welcome, thank you. And thank you to our candidates for gracing us with their presence. Thank you to our attendees. This is a very special evening. This is the first of many East Side candidate forums that we will be hosting. Thank you.
And everybody, we've got the largest crowd I heard. This is an amazing crowd, amazing night. Give yourselves another round of applause. The Eastside APA community is very large and has a significant voter voice. Bellevue recently became a minority-majority city. We have over 41,000 registered voters who self-identify as Asian in the Eastside. And the community is about a third immigrant and makes up about 36% of the Eastside population, and that number is rapidly increasing. We organized this event for the API community to educate ourselves about our candidates here and to educate the candidates about our concerns and issues. So this evening, we are very fortunate to have 4 state Senate candidates with us. We have Libertarian Michelle Darnell, a paralegal who is running for the 48th District State Senate seat. Let's give her a round. Her competitor is Democrat Patty Kuderer, an attorney who was appointed to the state Senate seat. We also have Democrat Manka Dhingra, a senior deputy prosecuting attorney for King County. And Manka is running for the 45th District State Senate seat against her competitor, Republican JinYoung Englund, who is a former staffer for U.S. So for tonight's forum, we have 4 key questions, and each candidate will have the opportunity to answer a question first as well as last, and we've drawn cards to determine the order. We will also have 4 minutes per question, and this is to really give the candidates the time to get into a little bit more detail than they may have had the opportunity to do in the past. As the moderator, I will step in during your responses to guide you back to the question if you happen to go a little bit off track. And we do have 2 timekeepers up front who will let you know how much time you have left. So please do stop when your time is up. So before we get to the first question, each of you will have 2 minutes to introduce yourself by describing your involvement and interaction with the Eastside API community through civic engagement, volunteerism, or work. So let's start on this side, on my left, with Manka Dhingra.
Can you guys all hear me? I need to move the mic.
Closer.
How's this? Oh, good. I can hear myself now. Okay, so my time start now? Excellent. So my name is Manka Dhingra, running for the Senate seat in the 45th District. And this is my first time running for office. And I will say that the reason why I decided to do this goes back to our election in November. I was fairly upset about the result, and it really made me feel like I had to get more involved. And a couple of things happened after that. MAPS actually had a safety forum in December. And I was there. We had 6 of our local Eastside police chiefs there. I was there because I've been involved in hate crimes since after 9/11, when the Sikh cab driver was assaulted in Seattle. And I've been part of the Seattle Police Department, Arab Muslim Sikh Advisory Council since then. And so in December, I go to this hate crime seminar, safety forum actually, that MAPS, the Mosque Red Wing had set up. And it was really eye-opening to me to be in that room and hearing from people about how scared they were. And 2 days after that, I was actually exactly in this room here at another safety forum that the Indian Association of Western Washington had put up. And it was the same thing again, hearing from the South Asian community how they were impacted by the election and how scared they were about what's going on. And that weekend, my husband Harjeet and I talked. And we decided that it was so crucial for our democracy to represent each and every one of us. And so me running for this position is me stepping up to take responsibility about what's going on in our community, in our state, and in our nation. And my involvement with the API community goes back 21 years ago. I'm one of the founders of JACL, the South Asian Domestic Violence Organization. I helped found it 21 years ago in my living room. And since then, I have been involved in the API community for over 2 decades. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everyone for putting this together.
Go ahead, JinYoung.
Hello everyone, my name is JinYoung Englund, and I'm a 3rd generation Washingtonian. My paternal grandparents were originally from the northern region of Korea, and in 1875 they were lucky. They got to immigrate to Washington State, and they were the ones where, my dad was 3 when the invasion of Korea happened. They had that split-second choice, and they chose to leave the northern region and make it to South Korea. For us, as 3rd generation Washingtonians, I was always taught to pay forward the gift of being American. And for us, that means the gifts of life, opportunity, and freedom. And our family has been doing it in multiple ways. My grandfather actually helped co-found the first Korean Tacoma Association. My family's from Tacoma. And he helped immigrant families get housing, he helped them start their businesses, helped them get their kids enrolled in schools. My aunt, who's a lifelong Democrat, some of you guys know I'm a Republican, she has served for over 30 years in Washington State Public Service. And my father has served 21 years in the U.S. Army. My brother is currently in the U.S. Army, and I ended up marrying a Marine from here in Bellevue. His family's from Sweden. They immigrated here in '51. And for us, I have just observed, over the last 30 years in Washington State, one-party government does not serve all people. And especially as minorities, we can't put all of our political eggs in one basket because we have seen over American history, power changes hands. And if we as minorities and as people want to maintain our voice in government instead of letting political parties take control, then we need to ensure a balance of power, not only in our state, but also a balance of power at the federal level. And that's why I hope to learn more about your issues and that you get a chance to know me as well. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Patty Kuderer, State Senator out of the 48th Legislative District. This building is located in the 48th, so welcome to the district. And I originally got involved in politics because of education. I believe very passionately in a very strong, robust public education system that prepares our students for a career, college, or life, and with skills for the 21st century. So I've been very deeply involved in my volunteer work over many, many years since moving to the district, dealing with education issues and working in the schools. And in terms of working with the API community, many of my contacts in the API community come from my work on PTSA. And I was co-chair, co-president of the Chinook Middle School for many years, where I earned the Golden Acorn for my service. And it was there too that I saw that we also need to change how we have education policy, that the funding piece is critical, but so is the policy piece. And there's some really important policy pieces that are coming out of Olympia, both this last year and going forward, that are really going to help set the stage for our students competing on a world level, as opposed not just within our state and in the country, on a world stage. And I'm very excited about that. I'm one of 9 children, and I can tell you that I learned very early on that my life was about a lot more than just me. And I also was taught at a very early age that the most valuable thing that you have to give someone is your word. And I have taken that to heart. I have raised 2 children, and I can tell you that they are both the pride of my life, and they vote. So thank you for coming, and I'm very pleased to be here.
Hi, my name is Michelle Darnell. I'm not really a professional politician. I got involved in politics right around the recession. I became a foreclosure defense paralegal, and what I saw going on there with the crony capitalism, the banks taking homes from people, it just struck me as unjust. And what I saw going on in the court system, not just in foreclosures but other areas, there's a lot of lack of justice in the court system. I was also seeing sort of an escalation in tension. I got involved with Occupy, for example, and what I was hearing from the left and the right, I heard a lot of similar things, but yet they were sort of attacking one another. So I ran across a quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And that has been my signature line ever since. I've been working in the foreclosure arena as a paralegal. I've run for office 3 times because never, never, never give up. I would hope to be a voice for this community. I would hope to be a voice for those people who feel oppressed of all races, creeds, and colors. There's a lot of people in this country who the system is not serving them. And what's ending up happening is they're pitted against one another. And it doesn't matter what your religion, your race, your creed, whatever that is, when you are fearful for your home, for your job, for your children, you tend to look at the other person as the other person. And so I would like to be not just a politician, I want to be a leader. I want to rise above this political rhetoric, bring people together, and create prosperity, liberty, and empowerment for all communities in this state. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your vote.
Okay, now let's get to our questions. The first question has to do with the hot topic of education. Patty, your issue. So McCleary v. State continues to be a big issue. As you all know, in January 2012, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled that the state of Washington failed to amply provide for the education of all children, and that the Washington legislature has to provide ample funding through dependable and regular tax sources. To address the McCleary decision, the 2017 legislature temporarily lifted the 1% property tax cap and used a property tax levy swap. This will result in higher property taxes in King County to fund education than in other parts of the state, which obviously affects everybody in this room. Each of you up here has taken a position against the property tax levy swap solution. And on October 24, the state Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on this issue. So the question for all of you is, do you believe that the budget that the Washington legislature enacted fully funds the 10 components of the state's basic education program in a sustainable way as required by McCleary? And if not, what is your proposed solution? So we're going to start with Manka over here, and this was based on the order that we pulled them out, and then JinYoung, you'll go next, and then we'll get to our 48 district candidates. It's 4 minutes, yes, so we will keep time, and I will interrupt if you guys kind of go off track. So please don't make me interrupt.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
You know, education is something that is so important, I think, especially to our immigrant communities. Many of us came here because of the opportunity that education provides. And a fully funded public education system is the foundation of our democracy. And it is what gives every child an equal opportunity to succeed. And this is why funding education is such a priority. And I do not believe that the Republican-controlled Senate actually did a good job with the budget. They did provide more money than we've had in the past, but they have not solved McCleary. We have to do more, and we have to do it in a way that makes sense. And so the property tax increase that was imposed by the Republican-controlled Senate is the highest tax increase on property that we have seen in recent history. And that is not sustainable, and actually it makes our district very, very unaffordable. And so we have to fix that. And I am committed to making sure that if and when elected, that I will be working on rolling back the property tax increases. We have over 900 corporate tax loopholes in our current tax code. And we have to make sure that we are reviewing them and we are closing them. The same time that the Republican-controlled Senate imposes property tax increase, guess who got a great break? We had oil companies that are simply transporting their goods from North Dakota to our ports to sell them overseas who got tax breaks. That's not okay. We have to prioritize people, small businesses, and our children. And that's where it starts, by making sure that's where our money is going to. We need accountability, we need transparency. It needs to be clear about the money that's coming in and where that money is going.
So Manka, can you say specifically what your proposed solution is?
So absolutely it would be to really take a look at our tax code, making sure we are cutting the corporate tax loopholes that currently exist in our tax code. There are some that have been there for the last 50 years that no one has gone back and looked at. And so if we are going to continue down providing tax incentives, which we need to through some corporations, because there needs to be this mutual beneficial contract. We need economy, we need businesses. But when we give them an incentive, the state, the people have to have a corresponding benefit. And we need to make sure we have automatic review of those exceptions. So let's make sure we're reviewing them every 2 years, every 3 years, to make sure that the intent behind that still exists. And that's how we end up cleaning up our tax code. You know, I run 2 nonprofits. I run my own unit at the prosecutor's office, And that's what transparency is all about, is making sure we understand the money coming in and we understand the money going out. And making sure that when that money is going out, it's going out to the things that we prioritize.
Manka,
And
will that money going out be sufficient to cover and adequately fund education?
A lot of it will be, so I need more than 4 minutes for this. So that's a great place to start. I think that's what we have to do, but I think we may have to go beyond. And that is where we have to look, everything needs to be on the table. When it comes to looking at, definitely closing that, looking at the possibility of a carbon tax, looking at the possibility of redoing some of our tax structure, but we have one of the most regressive tax systems in the country. You know, that's a fact, and we have to start doing things to address it. Because a healthy economy starts by having a robust middle class. And so we have to make sure that our tax structure is conducive to growing that middle class and supporting education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manka. JinYoung. Not at all. Do you believe that the budget that the Washington legislature enacted fully funds the 10 components of the state's basic education program in a sustainable way? And if not, what is your proposed solution?
So my hand, I'm not raising my hand because I have a question. I got bit by a pit bull, so I have to keep it elevated. So I apologize for that. Thank you. No, I'm just going to step forward. Thank you, doctor. So I'm a Washington kid who grew up in Washington schools and hope that I'll have the opportunity to serve Washington in this Washington job as a state senator. And here's the thing. When I study our past budget and I study our education public policy history and our education funding history, this is what I've observed. Under one-party government, we failed as a state to fund basic education. Hence, it triggered the McCleary decision. And it was only under a balanced government, where the House was run by Democrats and the Senate was run by Republicans by, I think it was 1 or 2 seats, so not really a majority, a very slim one, that we actually balanced the budget. And it was actually under the late Senator Andy Hill, whose seat that we are running to finish, that he, as the chair of the Budget Committee, saw that under one-party control, they were using education as an excuse to create and raise more taxes. And he said, that's not right. Education's a priority, so we have to exercise fiscal discipline and fund it first. Education deserves our first dollar and not the last dime. And it was under Andy's leadership and under a bipartisan agreement that we were able to increase education funding, not once, but twice. It was under this balance of power that we also lowered college tuition. Why? Because we exercised fiscal discipline. And that's the type of leadership that I want to continue on for our district and for our state. Now, for the McCleary Agreement, I have said over and over, and you can read it in the Seattle Times as well, that I would not have voted for it as the way that it was written. And here's why. Because in our district, Lake Washington School District is disproportionately hit by the levy swap. And I understand why they did it, because they're trying to create equity across our state, because when our state, again, failed to fund education under one-party system, it created disparity. And I'm one of the kids that used to be in the opportunity gap. And by opportunity gap, I mean kids who are low income, kids who have to learn English as a second language, but also kids with special needs. And what we are learning in education currently, the positive thing about the agreement is that now over half of Washington State's operating budget is going towards education. That's over $25 billion. And so the question at this point is, do we have enough money? The question is, how is the money being spent? And are we targeting and are we being smart about how we spend the money to actually achieve better outcomes for kids?
So what is your solution if you don't think that it's adequate, especially since this was proposed by split
Well,
party?
no. I'm not saying it's not adequate. Here's the thing, it was just agreed upon, so it's going to take about 2 years for it to go into effect before we see whether or not it's adequate. If I'm elected, what I promise to do is to work actively, not only with OSPI, but with school districts, to find ways in which constituents, voters, can get eyes on how the money is being spent and where it's going. One of my ideas is to do an app challenge and to see if we can create transparency, because I think if parents are equipped with knowing where the money is being spent and how it's being spent, then we can start looking at, okay, do we actually need more money, or or can it be better spent, the money that we have? So I know.
And how would you better spend it, or if it's not enough, what would you do? Where would you get the money resources?
Yes, so I think one positive thing about McCleary is that it was a bipartisan agreement. If you look, Democrats also voted for this bill. That what they did was, so our state population is booming and our economy is growing. Last year, our revenue grew by $3 billion, and what they did was they allocated a chunk of that towards education. That's called fiscal discipline. That's called prioritizing the things that we care about, and that's what I support.
Okay, we're out of time.
Yes,
Thank you.
okay.
Okay, let's go to Patty. Kuderer.
Well, to answer the question, no, we didn't fully fund education, and no, it's not sustainable. For one of the reasons that you mentioned is the temporary lifting of the 1% property tax cap. That comes back in 5 years, so that means we're going to be back in this same mess again in 5 years. And you know, I have a legal background, and you know, if I were a betting person, I would bet at least 50-50 odds that the Supreme Court comes back and says we haven't done our job, just based on the McCleary decision. The second piece of this is we also didn't do our job we failed to pass a capital budget. And in that capital budget was $1 billion allocated for school construction. That again, I think the Supreme Court, that raises the odds. I think then you go way over 50% that they're going to come back and say we have not fully funded education and we have not found a sustainable mechanism. The reality is the property tax is not a sustainable way to fund education. It is a regressive tax. I did vote against it, the bill, for several reasons. The first is the gimmick with the temporary lifting of the property tax cap. But also, there was this perverse consequence of a property tax cut to the tune of $371 million to large corporations in the state. Now, in fairness to them, they didn't ask for it. Again, it's the perverse consequence of poorly drafted legislation, right? And so what would any rational person do but put an amendment on the bill to recapture that $371 million a year so that we could lower the amount of property taxes we were actually asking everybody else to pay. And that failed in a divided legislature. The Senate Republicans killed that amendment. And you can talk about one-party rule. We haven't had that in how many years? 7? And what we have seen is this continual clogging of the system and a backlog of really good policy that gets left on the cutting room floor time and time and time again. And under a divided legislature, for the first time, we didn't pass a capital budget. So what would I do to solve the problem? I would start by recapturing that $371 million a year, because they don't need a property tax cut. That's a ridiculous thing to have to allow to go forward. So I would do that. I would also create a public infrastructure bank. Now stay with me. Now what I would do with that would be a bank that would be set up to essentially self-fund our own infrastructure projects. This would take some of the pressure off the general fund where our education is funded. We would do low-cost loans to cities, counties, the state, public utility districts, far less than what we're paying Wall Street now to borrow the money. We would essentially be a self-lending program. We would pay ourselves a lower interest rate, but it would be self-sustaining. You'd pay your own. The operating costs would come out of the profits that were generated, and also we would eventually have enough money to continue funding our own infrastructure improvements.
And would that be enough to adequately fund education?
That would be part of the solution. The other part is that we're going to have to fix the property tax fiasco this next session. We're going to have to address that. By doing that, you're going to have to substitute a different tax. I am for more progressive taxes, either a carbon tax or a capital gains tax. And the capital gains tax that was proposed by the House would have raised $1 billion per biennium. And that would have affected less than 1% of the population in our state. In the 48th legislative district, that would have affected less than 6% of the population. If you look at what the property tax is going to do, it's going to affect 100% of the taxpayers. And that includes those on a fixed income, those who are dealing with developmentally disabled kids, our veterans, people who can least afford to pay it. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
Oh, I agree. We need to do something about our education system. We've been talking about McCleary. Well, I've run 3 times. I could say I'm running a I told you so. I think a lot of the problem is the polarization up in Olympia. It seems to me that we're talking about tax, and how we're going to fund this. I was actually at the hearing, one of the hearings for McCleary, and I remember the judge asking, well, what does ample mean? No one seems to be able to explain what the word ample means, and I frankly think no one really knows. So that's why I come from a little bit different perspective. I think they have gone a long way in addressing the funding side. I'd like to be a voice for a different perspective. What are we doing with the money? When I'm talking to teachers as I'm out doorbelling, what I'm hearing is the money is circulating at the top. It's not making it into the classroom. These teachers, one teacher was telling me she's spending 2 hours a day because she has to comply with these top-down mandates, and Common Core, and so on and so forth. We're concerned about the automation that might be coming our direction. You know, we increase the minimum wage, it increases the cost of labor, therefore companies start to automate. And our kids are not keeping up. Our education system is not keeping up. Well, what is the problem? The system is not incentivized for excellence. And basically the system, and I would argue the WEA, is holding our teachers, our students, our parents, and our communities hostage here. With more money, but we are not addressing the systemic problems in the system that are failing our kids.
So Michelle,
Most of you, excuse me, go.
I was going to say, what are your specific proposals in light of...
Well, I wanted to make one point here. Most people don't know we spend over 14,000, probably around 15 now, federal, state, and local per child per year. 1 in 4 kids doesn't graduate. We need to address that. What would I do? I would think about, let's talk about what can we do to incentivize the system towards excellence. I think choice. I think we need to talk about choice, charter, and vouchers. I know it's scary. It's a place we haven't been, but we need to talk about it. And I want to be that counterweight, that counterbalance. You know, I'm not talking about tipping over the apple cart overnight. I just want to bring a different perspective to the table. Because as I talk to teachers, students, and parents, and I've had 4 kids go through the system, it's more than a money problem. And there's plenty of folks up in Olympia that are more than happy to take your money out of your wallets and take money out of our communities. I want to bring a different voice to Olympia. Thank you.
So Michelle, real quick, since you saw a little bit of time, ample is actually defined in the ruling of McCleary as more than adequate and fully sufficient. And with these options that you're proposing, like the choice, charter, and vouchers, would that not just take out more money from the funding that is there available for education?
Well, let me spell it out to you this way as a hypothetical. That 14,000, let's just hypothetically, if you took $14,000 federal, state, and local, and you gave and 7,000 of that followed the backpack, for example. That family can choose a public school, a private school, a charter school, that child can go wherever. 7,000 is still with the school system, and they're not educating the child, but now they have an incentive because they want the other 7,000 back, right? So it improves the public school because they have more money and they're not educating the child. And it creates this incentive and competition and choice and empowerment. And families will be more engaged in education because they get a choice. They get to have a voice in their children's education, and they're not just told that you're going to go to XYZ school, you know, school district, whatever.
Thank you, Michelle. So moving on to our question number 2. This has to do with immigration and racial harassment. With their entrepreneurial spirit and strong work ethic, immigrants have a significant impact on Washington's economy. In 2014, they earned nearly $31 billion and contributed over $8 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. Undocumented immigrants in our state are also part of the labor force and contribute over $300 million in taxes each year. More than 170 70,000 US citizens live with at least one family member who is undocumented, including 18,000 DACA recipients, deferred action for childhood arrivals. And 18% of all undocumented immigrants in Washington are Asian or Pacific Islander. The rapidly changing immigration policies and enforcement has caused stress and uncertainty. There is also significant stress in our communities caused by hate crimes and hate speech, even here on the East Side. So the question is, what will each of you do as a state representative, both locally and statewide, to address these concerns and ensure that our racially visible immigrant communities are protected? And we want to hear specific policies and concrete actions that you will take. And for this question, we're going to be starting with Michelle and then work our way this way. So go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I definitely think we have a problem here. I kind of alluded to it earlier. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people in America right now that, as a consequence of the recession, a lot of folks haven't recovered yet, that are frankly scared. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're down on the bottom rung. If they really got to know other people in their community, they might not be so scared. But right now, they're scared for their jobs. And so when they hear, folks coming in from other countries, they want to put up the wall, so to speak. My personal position is that I think that if we had a vibrant economy, these folks wouldn't care anymore. We'd have jobs. We'd have a sense of security. So policy-wise, what I want to do is I want to talk about how can we grow our local economy and our state economy in such a way that families, once again, can feel empowered. They won't feel so insecure about their jobs. And I think with that, you'll see a little bit of a change in the overall environment in terms of, I've just been very, how would I put it, just alarmed. It's of no surprise to me that I see what's going on in our country right now. None whatsoever. I recall a story my father told me back in, he was in a psychology class. He took pet rats, docile pet rats. He put them in a box, back when you could still do this, do experiments. He put stressors on them. He took their food away. He shrunk their space, and they soon became cannibalistic. They were attacking one another. And over the course of the last decade, and as I've been involved, watching what's going on, we've seen that escalation. And unfortunately, folks, some of you have probably been the victim of what's going on in our country. And that breaks my heart, and frankly, it's one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing, because we have to change that.
So Michelle, if we address the economic concerns, do you think that'll address the underlying hate and immigration xenophobia that we have? And what do you do in the meantime until we reach that economic better situation?
You make up a good point. I think we need a new type of leadership, frankly. What I'm seeing is this polarization, and our leaders are not rising above the rhetoric and saying, enough with this. Enough. We are Americans. We need to unite. We need to address our problems. We need to embrace our diversity. And we need to attack these problems with solutions. We need to listen to one another and stop attacking. And stop, it's almost like we're in these little fractional groups. And I want to be the type of, running for office, yes, I guess I'm a politician, but I want to be more than that. I want to be a leader. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It breaks my heart to see what is happening in this country. Many of you folks came here for freedom, for empowerment. I've had the opportunity to travel to 17 different countries, and it alarms me of what's going on in my own country. Folks, we need to change that.
How do you propose we do that?
New type of leadership. We've got to, the two-party system is broken. That is why I'm running against significant challenges, mind you, as a third-party candidate, because I have had enough of this broken system. And it starts with listening. Thank you.
Okay, let's go with Patty.
Well, I can tell you when I'm out knocking on doors, I've talked to people who are afraid about what's happening at the national level. The immigration ban that was initially proposed by President Trump was offensive, and it was wrong, and it put a lot of people in fear. And you know, it's a backwards approach to dealing with the immigration problem. I mean, building a wall, we need to be, you know, building relationships. That's what we need to be doing. And leadership does matter. I will agree with Michelle on that. Leadership matters. And when you have the leader of the United States coming out with an immigration ban that's so detrimental to our state that you have Microsoft and Boeing and Alaska Airlines and Amazon and Google and countless other companies, 100 of them, coming out and saying, no, you can't do this. This is affecting the people that work for us, that are part of our community, that stood up to the president. And then we have our fabulous Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, who sued. I supported that lawsuit, and I supported his efforts to hold the Trump administration accountable. And the other thing we need to do, another thing we need to, I support the DREAM Act. And what he did with giving our DACA folks a deadline without even publicizing it is beyond reprehensible. All right, he does. You know, my folks used to tell me that you can always tell what someone values by how they act. Not so much what comes out of their mouth, but how do they act. Now, if you have watched what's been happening at the national level, I think it's fair to say that there's ample, how we define that, evidence that President Trump doesn't really care about minority populations. I think that's fair to say.
So how about what you're going to propose to do here locally and statewide?
Well, we've already sent a letter out to the congressional delegation telling them that they have to pass DACA again, and I've signed on to that. I will support that locally here. I will support efforts to resist the immigration ban, as I have done in the past. I'm also a discrimination attorney. And there have been attempts to weaken our discrimination laws. And these are avenues for people of color to get justice in our system and be protected, quite frankly, from discriminatory conduct. And I have stood up to those efforts, and I will continue to do that as well. Sometimes it's not proposing legislation. Sometimes you need to be opposing legislation. And I feel very strongly about we have one of the strongest laws against discrimination in the entire country. And I am determined to keep it one of the strongest.
How about any actions to oppose the hate speech or hate crimes?
Yeah, you know, yes, we need to beef that up because, you know, we're seeing a rise in that. When I've been out knocking on doors, like I said, I've heard it from the Muslim community, I've heard it from the Jewish community, I've heard it from our transgender community. I was telling you this earlier. You know, there are a lot of people who are being discriminated against now, quite honestly, because they feel, those who are doing it feel empowered, and they feel empowered because by what they're seeing at the national level. And we do need to change leadership, but we need to change it in the Senate, here in Washington, and we need to change it in Washington, D.C.
Great. Moving to our 45th district candidates, JinYoung.
So I come from a family of immigrants. As I mentioned, my family's from Korea, my husband's is from Sweden. And immigrants were the backbone of this country. I mean, literally everyone who comes here is an immigrant. And I disagree with what's happening at the national level. You know, I think that it's just another example of why one-party government will fail us. And that's why we need a balance of power. It's because we need to ensure that all voices are heard. And under a one-party government, half the population is being silenced, and I think that's wrong. I don't know if any of you have checked out my website, but I've actually spoken up against protecting DACA, those protected under DACA, and extending that. What would I practically do, you know, if elected? You know, I've already mentioned with Anila. Some of the ideas that I have is, I do think it is the role of state legislators to show leadership, and I agree with both Michelle and Patty on that. And one of the ways that I hope to do that is to bring people together. People who have never naturally would engage with one another or be friends or ever have an opportunity to meet. I want to be someone who brings people together. My goal is to make a list of all the people who are leaders in our state and who maybe have never met each other and never even had a conversation. And I think it starts there. I think that we fight against hate with love. And I think we fight against that kind of sentiment by taking positive actions forward. I think another way legislatively is I would also encourage our congressional delegation to reconsider the renewal of H-1B visas. A lot of the companies in our state are hurting for talent, and I think it was a mistake that Congress let that die, and we need to be able to inform them of how important this is not only for our economy, but also for a healthy society. In 2012, the Pew Research Study Group, they noted that Asian Americans are the fastest growing immigrant population in America. They noted that around 2030, we are going to be the majority in this country. And we have a responsibility to step up. We have a responsibility to be at the negotiating table and provide our perspective, which is why I don't agree with a one-party government or as minorities, and for me as a woman, to put all of our political eggs in one basket.
So JinYoung, what would you do in terms of policy with respect to hate speech and hate crimes?
In terms of policy, I think the first step is to have these conversations, because I don't think that I by myself am equipped to write that legislation. What I would want to do first is I want to meet with all the different groups that are experiencing discrimination and come together to the table. Another policy initiative at the state level is that, in Washington State, we need to ensure that there is a pathway to citizenship. I have a good friend where they actually discovered one of their employees was undocumented, and you know what? That family stood up. They stepped up to help them go through the immigration process. And my family, my aunt, she applied to come to America 10 years ago. She finally got passage to America this year. But she's from Korea, an ally state. It took her 10 years. Clearly, there is something wrong with the management of our immigration system at the national level.
What would you do as a state legislator for the national level?
Well, and that's the thing. I'd only be a state senator, so like Senator Kuderer, I'd only be able to write a letter and encourage them. But again, I think, as legislators, we have to build relationships. And I'm hoping, and again, because, power switches hands, currently there is a Republican leadership. I am a Republican. Hopefully that maybe they won't listen to Senator Kuderer for whatever reason, but maybe they'll listen to me. And I think that's why, as minorities,
okay, audience members, keep it down. Continue.
And that's why, as minorities and women, we shouldn't put all of our political eggs in one basket if we want to maintain our power and have a voice.
Great. Thank you so much. JinYoung, let's move on to Manka.
Our Senate Majority Leader wears a Make America Great hat, okay? That is what's going on at our state Senate.
Why is it make
Let's keep it down.
And so I've been working on hate crime legislation since after 9/11. And I have to tell you that in the beginning, when I used to go to the Arab Muslim Sikh Advisory Board, these were rooms and meetings that were full of stress. There was distrust, there was tension, and they were hard. And I have to say, last December when I went to the mosque, when I came here to do safety forums and to work on hate crimes, it was a different culture. Because at that time, there was trust. We had law enforcement there, we had community members there, and we were having that dialogue. And we were talking about what does it mean to keep the community safe. So I have been working on those relationships for over a decade, and that is what we need to continue doing. I'm actually one of the trainers for law enforcement and do crisis intervention training, and that's what we talk about. We talk about implicit bias, we talk about de-escalation. That's what the state needs to do policy-wise, be engaged and make sure our population feels safe. as a state, we have to make sure that our law enforcement officers are here to serve and protect. That if someone is a victim of crime, they feel comfortable calling 911, seeking protection, and making sure that they are not going to be deported, that they're not going to be asked their immigration status because they're not officers for ICE. They are here to protect and serve. So making sure those policies are available statewide. Making sure that when you are a witness, when you are a victim, you feel safe calling law enforcement. And that is what we do as a state. And we make sure, because given what's going on at the federal level, this is when states have to step up. They have to step up and make sure they are taking care of their population.
So Manka, you addressed law enforcement and de-escalation training. What about for individuals, hate crimes by individuals?
Absolutely, and I've trained on this actually. I've done multiple trainings this year alone. And I will say this is where it is very crucial that every single person step up and report any kind of hate crime, any kind of hate speech. And I can tell you, as a prosecutor and as a candidate, those are things we take very seriously. And we have to make sure we are prosecuting them to the full extent of the law. Because this is unacceptable. No one in this country should be made to feel unsafe. Now, there's a lot more data keeping that our law enforcement are doing, and we have to make sure we continue that practice. That it is very clear that if someone says something to you when you are at the Bellevue shopping mall, it doesn't matter if you don't know who yelled that out to you. Call and report it, because law enforcement tracks it. So let's make sure we're tracking every single instance of hate. And let's make sure that we are in a position to fully prosecute them. And even if you're witnessing, there are things people can do as bystanders. If you see that someone is saying something offensive to someone, go stand by the person who's being abused.
How would you encourage people to do that as a state senator?
Well, as a state senator, I think you definitely have to make sure you have policies in place, and that starts by making sure our law enforcement officers have the ability to make sure they're serving and protecting and not working double duty enforcing federal laws. And so making sure that we are taking care of our residents, and that's where it starts. And again, agreeing with Patty Kuderer on putting pressure at the congressional level to make sure that we're doing everything we can to impact that policy.
Great, thank you. Let's give all the candidates a round of applause. Those were two really tough questions. So let's move on to question number 3. And this is about individual privacy. We regularly hear about hacks of private information. We're vulnerable to identity theft, and there's concerns about federal government intrusion and targeted profiling. What actions, if any, will you take if you are in the Senate to protect the individual privacy of people in our state? So again, you each have 4 minutes, and this time we are starting with JinYoung. You get to start first, and then Manka, and then we'll move to Michelle, and then Patricia. Patty, sorry.
Oh. Well, number one, there is an idea being proposed that we as citizens should be taxed for every mile that we drive. I would oppose that because I oppose the idea of the government tracking every single mile that you drive and then charging you for that, because talk about a regressive tax. I mean, the people who can't afford to live closest to their work are the ones who earn the least. And so that's number one from a very basic public policy state level. Number two, technology is moving very fast. I mean, everything from, Google Glass failed because it ran into these privacy problems. AI is quickly ramping up. And I think that that's another reason why people like myself with a background in technology should be elected to serve in elected office, because we understand that world. And frankly, there are a lot of people in our government who don't understand technology. I mean, it's only in the last, I think, 5 or 6 years that people started using Facebook. It was under President Obama that people started using social media. And so I think electing someone who has familiarity with technology, who has worked in the industry, will go a long way. Secondly, I think that we as people need to do, this is where I agree with Ms. Dhingra, we need to start speaking up more. And if there are certain issues in regards to privacy that you're concerned about, people need a way to actually connect with their elected officials. That's why when I go door to door, I give my cell phone number, because I want to make sure that people people can reach me directly. And if you have a question, but more importantly, an idea on how we can work on these very interesting and complex problems together, that we can do so together.
So using your tech background, what proposals do you have to address, especially since social media offers an avenue for privacy intrusion or identity theft?
No, you're right. So a lot of privacy public policy is centered around a lot of these social media sites, right? Because they're tracking everything that you do, including where you are, what you buy, creating a profile of who you are. You know, a lot of that's being handled at the federal level, but I think at the state level, if there are specific concerns, we do have to go after it. I think more so the concern is in regards to transparency in our own government. And so my background is actually in blockchain technology. It's a decentralized digital ledger. And so the beauty of blockchain technology is that the actions are public, but the identity is private. Now think about that, right? And that's something that a distributed ledger allows. And so I've already started thinking about working with this fintech community on what are ways in which we can use new platforms like that in government in order to protect identities of people, but yet still use technology. One example is in voting. You know, currently a lot of people vote in our state by mail, but in the future, you know, using blockchain technology, you can actually create a digital identity that is unique to you, and you would be able to vote, and your privacy would be maintained, but you would be able to operate in the digital economy and digital space. So that's just one idea. We're still many years away from that technology maturing into those types of platforms, but it is something that I'm thinking about.
And since you mentioned voting, I know there's a concern about voting records being exposed to the federal government. Would you support or not support sharing that information with the federal government?
I don't support it. Yeah.
Thanks. I think that's all. Thank you. Okay, Manka, your turn.
Thank you. You know, internet privacy is something that we all think about. I think especially those of us who have children as well, we are something that we're very careful about. But there's the flip side, because guess what Bitcoin's used by? It's used by drug smugglers, it's used by arms dealers, it's used by kidnappers, because they can get away with what they want to get away with because their identity is protected. So we have to be smart and strategic about the new technology and figure out a way on how we are actually able to use it and how we are able to protect people. It's a balancing act. And you know, at the federal level, you know, they are talking about getting rid of protections on the internet, that your information can be sold without your knowledge. That is a problem. So let's make sure at a statewide level that we are protecting that identity, that you have a say in whether or not your internet provider can sell your information, who they can sell it to, and where it's going. When it comes to education, there's a lot of technology that's being used in our education system. Especially in Lake Washington, a lot of our schools, they get a netbook. They're doing a lot of stuff online. Let's make sure we as parents, we as teachers, we as administrators of education are aware of who are the people who are providing this information. Where is this information being stored and what is it being used for? But we have to be deliberate and thoughtful about this information and its multiple uses. And I will tell you that there are ways in which we, especially as law enforcement, can use technology. When someone has an emergency, when someone is stranded somewhere, we are able to track that person so we know where they are, so we can provide them with resources and help. So it comes up to a balancing thing. You cannot say it's all bad or it's all good, but it is making sure people are comfortable and are aware and have options on where their information goes and who sees it.
So as a state senator, what would you propose to be able to get that balance right?
And I think that's definitely making sure that internet providers are not able to sell your information without your knowledge. I think if you have the ability to check that box and say, no, you will not sell my information, no, you will not track where I'm going. And that is right when the state needs to step up, especially since these kinds of policies are being looked at the federal level. And again, that's where, again, it's more important for states to stand up to make sure we are protecting the rights of people within our state.
And anything you would do with respect to concerns about federal government intrusion or targeted profiling?
Oh, absolutely. I think the fact that we did not turn over our election voter database was absolutely the right call. There's absolutely no way that we are continuing. And I have to tell you, the Republicans in Olympia did try to put together a Muslim registry. It's a good thing that didn't go through. But there are being attempts made on a daily basis to get documentation and databases like that together. And we have to be diligent, especially at the state level, in making sure that that does not happen. And so absolutely making sure we're fighting, standing up and fighting against any of those attempts.
Great. Thank you so much, Manka. Okay, so now we get to move over this side to Michelle.
Well, I'm a libertarian, so you probably guessed what my position on a lot of these things are. I'm very concerned that both sides, Democrats and Republicans right now, are using some of the recent events to give cause to take more and more of our personal freedoms, personal freedoms and liberty away from us and invade our privacy. I mean, just look at the airports now. I mean, now I'm getting reports that, you know, they're checking in their cell phones and our data and online and so on and so forth. And it seems to me what's going on here is we're not looking at the real causation of a lot of what we're seeing in our society right now in terms of the violence and so on and so forth. They're using these instances as an excuse to take away more and more of our liberties. One of the things I would like to do is let's really examine what the real causes that are contributing to these instances. For example, you know, we had this situation in Las Vegas. You're going to hear a lot about gun control and how we need to do more surveillance of Americans so that we can sort of, prevent and predict these sort of instances. Well, folks, first of all, we can't legislate hearts, and I think with that, we need political change, but we also need cultural change in this country right now. But that's another subject. But further than that, why aren't we talking about the fact that most of these acts of violence, there's a common thread going through them that nobody wants to talk about? Antidepressants. We have a society right now where 1 in 6 Americans are on antidepressants. And recall that I've been talking to you about the fact that more and more Americans are scared, they're stressed, they're losing their jobs. 40% of middle class wealth was effectively taken by too big to fail corporations. And none of our legislators did much of anything at all. Our own Attorney General, we had over 600,000 families kicked out of their homes.
So Michelle, let's get back to privacy and specifically.
Well, what I'm saying is we need to address these sorts of issues because what's happening is the violence that we're seeing is now being used as an excuse for the government to have more power and control. A government that's very much controlled by those too big to fail corporations and entities. So, in terms of what I want to do, now policy-wise, one of the things I would do, I have a lot of young millennials on my team and they're always talking about this stuff. So, one of the things as a senator, I don't necessarily think that I have all the answers, but what I would do is bring stakeholders around the table, people from the various industries, people like yourself, and let's talk about what the solutions are. What are the problems, what are the solutions, and then we can get to the actual policy. But I'm not a parliamentarian, I am a humanitarian. And what I see going on in our society goes far beyond policy positions. Far beyond. We have a polarization at the federal level and at the state level right now that is ripping us apart. We need a new type of leadership. I believe I've heard over and over that the one party being up there doesn't work, or being in Olympia. Well, I'm here to say 2 parties doesn't work. These 2 parties are controlled by the very entities that are taking our wealth, power, property, liberty away from us. I want to be a voice against that. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Senator Kuderer.
Thank you. Well, protecting our personal privacy is rapidly becoming a very, very important issue, and it has been for me since I got to the legislature the end of 2015. I served on the state government committee, and there was a lot of conversation about drones and the ability of drones, to be the size of a housefly and fly over to somebody's house and inside their house. I mean, the technology has definitely rapidly advanced, and our laws have not kept up with it. We saw the Equifax breach, right? And right before we were told about that breach, of course, a couple of the CEO and a couple other folks sold their stock and made a lot of money. Of course, that's now being investigated. So in terms of what I would do to protect our privacies, you have to have common sense legislation that holds the appropriate entities accountable. So in terms of Equifax, there's going to be criminal prosecution. There's absolutely no, I see that in their future, given what they did. They violated some Federal Trade Commission laws there. And I also think there should be some regulation. I know that not all regulation is created equal, and in some cases, regulation, another word for that, or words for that, is consumer protection, right? And that's what needs to happen here, is that they need to be held accountable, and there needs to be rules put in place to prevent this sort of thing from happening. At the state level, what I'm working on with some of my Senate colleagues is legislation that will require any business that sells your data to reveal to you, without you even having to ask, who they sold it to, so you can see that information. I think this is really critical, important information for you to know. And I agree with Manka that we need to have very strong laws that say that when you opt out, you mean it. You really are opted out. And if they have to reveal to you what they did with your data, you can find out if you opted out and they went and sold it anyway. And let's be honest here. I mean, there is a lot of money in this data collection. They are mining it for all sorts of purposes. Anyone who's ever been on Facebook and prior to that had been on a Macy's or a Nordstrom website, you'll see whatever you were looking at shows up on the side there. I mean, it's creepy and it's spooky.
What legislation is this, Senator Kuderer?
It's legislation that's still in the formative stages. Nothing's been dropped yet, but the idea is more transparency at the level where accountability needs to be had. And that's at the organizations that are selling the data, right? The businesses that are actually in the business of taking money for your data. It's your data, it's your privacy, and we need to be better at protecting it. In terms of the voter, the Commission on Voter Integrity, that's one of those Orwellian names, I think. Anyway, I wrote a letter along with some other senators asking Secretary Wyman not to release that information because, quite honestly, I mean, they were asking for a lot more than what was normally public. I mean, they wanted Social Security numbers, they wanted voting records, for crying out loud. This was clearly a violation of personal privacy, and but we have the broadest Public Records Act in the country, and it was enacted by Citizen Initiative in 1972 after Watergate. And we just last year, for the first time in many decades, had an omnibus revision to that bill. But that also we need to take a look at that to put in more protections for public employees in particular, but for all of us in terms of our privacy. And so that time's up.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to get to our fourth question, and this is essentially called the first bill of the 2018 session. So let's assume each of you is actually elected to the on November 7th to the state legislature. So let me first say congratulations. And given the top campaign issues that you each have expressed, please tell us what bill would you first introduce in the 2018 legislative session and why, and how would that bill impact the Asian Pacific Islander community? So again, I'll say, what bill would you introduce first, and how would that bill impact the API community? So this one we're going to start with Michelle. You get to go first.
What bill would I introduce first? Well, I think One of the first bills I would like to introduce is on the housing side, and this is kind of my wheelhouse. I have seen, like I mentioned earlier, over 600,000 families lose their homes in the state to foreclosure. We have some cases where we have 26 causes of action. There's been very, very little done about this. Now, some people would say, well, you know, we don't have a foreclosure issue anymore. Well, we certainly have a housing issue. A lot of those folks lost their homes, they moved to urban areas, and with the growth because of our tech industry, coupled with that, this has driven rates up. And we have tents now popping up like mushrooms. And frankly, back in 2011, I first testified on this issue. I've talked to many legislators about it. They look the other direction. So one of the things I would like to propose is a homeowner bill of rights. I want to make sure that we are not set up for a rinse and repeat. Because frankly, when the average cost of a house in Kirkland is $700,000, most folks can't afford that. And you know what they're doing now? They're probably borrowing more money than they can afford. And what's going to happen then is when the Fed adjusts the rate, or if we have a downturn because, you know, economies cycle, we're going to have another crisis on our hands. And I want to make sure that every homeowner gets the justice that they deserve in the court system. I mean, what I have seen, we actually have a non-judicial foreclosure state, by the way. You don't necessarily get your day in court. The bank can take your home without you ever getting your day in court. And a lot of these folks were told to stop making their payment to qualify for HAMP, the federal program, and they were given, it was a bait and switch. Once you miss your 3 months payments, it wrecks your credit, and then they kind of delay and deny and you lose your home. So I want to make sure that that never ever happens again. So that's one of the bills that I would like to sponsor. I would also sponsor, if I can add one.
Well, let me ask you about the homeowner bill of rights. What would that include besides this issue about foreclosure rates?
Well, specifically, we need to address the DTA. The Deed of Trust Act basically allows banks to take your homes, and technically they're not banks, they're servicers, they're third-party debt collector, but they can take your home without really having any proof of title. It'd be like me coming, you know, and wanting to repo your car, but I don't necessarily have proof that I have any interest in this. And there's 3 barriers in the deed of trust system. One is the homeowner, if they're fighting the bank, they file for what's called a TRO, temporary restraining order, to stop the sale because there's been some shenanigans. They have to pay a bond. And that bond is equivalent to their mortgage payment while they're paying for the representation. How many people do you think can afford to do that? Folks, that's why these folks lost their homes. And, you know, you like Bob Ferguson, but I take issue with Bob Ferguson. He ran on protecting homeowners, and he did nothing. I know many, many homeowners who begged and pleaded that the Consumer Protection Act would be enforced in our state. And you talk about education, the money on the table here. If we were to sue these banks and recover some of those damages, like Oregon sued what's called MERS, Mortgage Electronic Registration System, for $7 million. We have 39 counties. That's a lot of money. So,
Just so I'm clear, you want the
Yeah.
Attorney General to enforce the CPA against banks in our state? Just yes or no? Is that
I'm sorry?
Did you want the Attorney General to enforce the Consumer Protection Act against?
Absolutely. That's not necessarily the bill I'm proposing, but
Fair enough.
as a senator, I would definitely be pursuing.
I just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely.
Yes. Senator Kuderer.
All right, well, I really am a strong proponent of education, as I said at the beginning. And the reality is we haven't invested enough in education. And it is really the best bang for our buck, because as a former prosecutor, I know what happens when we don't educate our students. They end up going through the court system, and then we pay 10 times that to incarcerate. And that is just, that's not a wise approach. And so I believe very strongly we need to invest in education. So my first bill would be to create a state infrastructure bank. And again, the relationship between funding education and the infrastructure bank is that the infrastructure bank would take away the pressure on the general fund and free up some more money in order to fund education to the level that it needs to be. And you know, right now at the state level, you know, when you're a new legislator, you get there and you're like, okay, you hear so much about the waste, fraud, and abuse, you know, and of course that's a bit of in the eye of the beholder in some cases. But I did see that we were spending $3.2 billion in debt service. These are on loans that we take from Wall Street. And these are for our infrastructure, right? And big infrastructure projects, literally like half of the cost of those projects are debt service. And so the idea behind a state infrastructure bank is that we would set up a bank where we would take taxpayer dollars, they would stay in the state of Washington to fund our own projects. And the benefit to us is we would be able to have a lower interest rate to fund these infrastructure projects, you know, a fraction of what we would be paying Wall Street. And over time, it would grow, and we would have a sustainable fund from which to maintain our infrastructure, improve our infrastructure, and take that pressure off the general fund so that we have money for education.
So, Senator Kuderer, how would that impact the API community? I forgot to ask this of Michelle, so I apologize, but how would that impact the API community?
Well, I think it would impact the API community the same way it would impact every taxpayer in the state. It would keep the amount we pay in taxes lower, because you're going to be paying a lower debt service. Let me give you a real-life example of what we could have done if we had had an infrastructure bank today. When Sound Transit hit and everybody's car tabs went way up, what we could have done is we could have refinanced those loan obligations that are tied to the old valuation schedule that's causing the high car tabs. We could have extinguished the legal obligation to use that valuation table and instantly lowered the car tab. That would have been an instance of how it could have worked in real time, right? But we don't have it. But we do need to have something like that to shore up our fiscal foundation, which will definitely help all taxpayers in the state. The idea is that by starting with a state infrastructure bank, which is a game changer, quite honestly, for the state. I mean, there's only one state in the country that has such an animal, and it's that, you know, liberal bastion of North Dakota. And, you know, they love their bank, and it gets along really, really well with the community banks and the credit unions and the big banks, and you know, it works collaboratively with the legislature to make sure that their fiscal foundation, their house is in order. And you know, they went through the Depression and they went through the recession with that bank better than any state in the country.
How would you overcome opposition to a state infrastructure bank?
Working with the stakeholders and addressing their concerns and letting them know that this isn't about competition for the big banks, this is about a complement, and this is about really investing in the state of Washington in a way that gives us a sustainable fiscal foundation.
Thank you. So this time when we come over here, we're actually going to go with Manka and then JinYoung. So go ahead, Manka.
Thank you. So I hope the mic's working fine now. I know there's a lot of adjustments being done there. So I have actually been working on policy issues around domestic violence, criminal justice, and mental health as a prosecutor for the last 10 years. And thank you for the election, I guess. It's going to be hard for me to pick one, but I will have to. The things I'm passionate about are education, equity and social justice, and absolutely domestic violence and criminal justice issues. Given recent events and just the way our country has been going in the last decade, I would love my first bill to be about closing loopholes that we have for possession of guns by people with a history of violence. One of the things as a prosecutor and working in the domestic violence field, I can tell you that the call that law enforcement dreads going to is a domestic violence call, because they end up being the most dangerous ones. Okay? Now, in the state of Washington, if you are convicted of a domestic violence offense, you lose your right to possess a firearm for all charges except one. If you're convicted of a harassment domestic violence, you don't lose your right to possess a firearm. I want to close that loophole. all domestic violence offenders need to be held equally accountable. And that means that when you are convicted, not charged, convicted of a domestic violence offense, you need to lose that right to possess a firearm. Because as a prosecutor, as an advocate for victims of domestic violence, I can tell you that it takes a lot to get someone to report the crime of domestic violence, to go through the legal process, to get a conviction. And at that point in time, we have to make sure that that survivor is protected. So that is definitely going to be one of my first bills. Part and parcel of that is actually another loophole that I have struggled with as a prosecutor and as someone who's worked in the mental health field. And with all due respect to Ms. Darnell, mental illness and mass shootings cannot be equated, okay? Because people who have a diagnosis of mental illness are more likely to be victims of crime rather than perpetrators of violence. What they do have in common, about 75% of the people who are involved in mass shootings have a history of domestic violence, because it's about violence, not about diagnoses. There's another thing that's been happening in our state, that individuals who have been charged with a criminal case, and if they've been found not competent, which means that they cannot proceed with the criminal case and the case gets dismissed, if they have a history of violence, we need to make sure that their access to a weapon is limited. This has been pushed back because of what's been going on with funding at Western State Hospital, access to restoration services. And so this is a loophole that has existed in the last 10 years because our mental health system has not been appropriately funded. So I want to make sure we actually close that loophole and really make sure that individuals who have that history of violence do not have access to firearms. So that's going to be my first one.
Manka, would you anticipate bipartisan support for this kind of bill that you're proposing?
You know, I should hope so, because it's practical, it makes sense, and frankly, the citizens, the residents of the state of Washington have spoken. Last year, they voted overwhelmingly for the extreme risk protection order. They voted overwhelmingly for enhanced background check. We have our residents taking leadership, and now it's time for our elected officials to take leadership in protecting the safety of individuals. So absolutely.
And we're going to get to
JinYoung, go ahead.
So as someone on the opposite side of the aisle, I agree with Ms. Dhingra. You know, I would fully support enhanced background checks and making sure that people who have a history of violent crimes or criminal background or mental illness are duly being investigated before they can be afforded, you know, rights to a gun. So I think, yes, you know, that kind of bill will gain huge bipartisan support. So for me, if I'm the one that has the honor of serving come this November, just by electing me, it will automatically prevent a new state income tax. We will also automatically prevent a new capital gains income tax, carbon tax, and an increase in the B&O tax. And that's just in response to what the people of Washington State has overwhelmingly said, which is every time we as Washingtonians get proposed with the idea of an income tax, we have voted against it. In 2010, it was the last time we voted it over 60%, so 2-to-1 against an income tax. So that would automatically happen if I'm the one that gets elected and maintains that balance of power. The legislation that I would proactively pursue has to do with transportation, because when I go door to door, the people in my district, over and over, the things I hear most about is I feel overburdened by taxes. I want to maintain quality education in public schools. And number 3, traffic. Traffic is awful. Wherever you are in Washington State, it's awful because our economy is booming, our population is growing faster than we ever anticipated, and one area that's really affecting people in a certain part of our district is the car tabs. And actually got interviewed about that again today, and I would hope to seek, I know the Democrats proposed a solution, the Republicans proposed a solution, they ran out of time and didn't get to that. In our district, when I meet immigrants in my district, whether they're Asian immigrants or European immigrants, the car tabs is hitting them really hard. And it's because a lot of immigrants are small business owners, meaning we have cars, and especially if you live on the east side, right? And especially if you have a family. You're not gonna walk to Costco with your 3 kids.
So what would your bill be?
So it would be a way to immediately bring relief to the families that are paying exorbitant card tab fees. So for one example, there's a Romanian immigrant family. They're paying over $1,200 for their card tabs fee. They were not prepared to pay out that money. They cannot afford that year after year. And so number one, I want to work with both Democrats and Republicans in the legislature to find a way to immediately bring relief to the families who suffered this year. And then moving forward, make sure that they don't have to keep paying such high fees.
Great. And you mentioned standing in opposition to the state income tax and capital gains tax.
Yeah.
What I want to know is how you respond to the charge that we heard earlier that Washington has the most regressive tax system in our nation.
Yeah, so I think an honest discussion about taxes and our budget in our state includes acknowledgement that our economy is booming. What that means is that last year alone, our state's revenue grew by $3 billion. And that's why I really strongly emphasize fiscal discipline and prioritizing our budget, because I don't think it's right to treat people like an ATM or a blank checkbook and keep going back to people and saying, we need more money, but there's no plan and there's no accounting of how the money has been spent. Our forecast shows that our economy will continue to grow, our tax revenue will continue to grow, and I believe it's my job as a legislator to bring more economic activity. So one thing I want to pursue is in enhancing tourism in our state. Because people go on vacation to spend money, so why not spend it here in Washington? Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Let's give all four candidates a round of applause. And I will say, it is so nice to be up here with four female candidates. You guys were so on top of it and stayed within your time, fortunately. Thank you for doing that. I hope I can exercise some moderator discretion here and give you each 1 minute for a closing statement. Is that okay? Yes? Okay, great. So let's do 1 minute closing statements. We started there with opening statements. So Michelle, let's start with you for your closing statement for 1 minute.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here tonight. You guys are more involved than the majority of the population, to tell you the truth, which is one of the reasons I think we have some of the problems we do right now. We get the same sort of leadership over and over and over again. I haven't been in Olympia, so I'm not, you didn't hear a lot of technical policy positions necessarily. I hope what you did hear was that I have a little bit different philosophical position. I've been out there fighting for people. I'm a fighter. I'm also a mediator. What I do for a living is I have the homeowner on one side, I have the bank on the other. Now, yeah, I tend to side with the homeowner, but at the end of the day, we get a resolution. At the end of the mediation, I should say. And how that starts is listening. I listen to both sides. I listen tonight to the different viewpoints. And what I would hope to do is take that skill to Olympia, because it seems to me this polarization is really hurting the people I care about most, my family and this community.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your vote.
Yes.
Thank you all for coming. This was really a fun evening. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to constituents. And I will say this, I haven't been in the legislature that long, but I will say that there are some legislators who take the job very, very seriously, and I know I do. I am one of those that cares about facts. I think they matter. I think science matters. I'm going to be one of those who's going to look at the information and make a reasoned decision on what's best for the people of this state. And that's how I've approached the job so far, and that's why I've been able to get my bills have gotten through the House and the Senate without hardly any opposition at all. Quite honestly, my bill in the Senate to help our deaf students passed 49-0. I do that by working across the aisle. It takes skill to do that. It takes time. It takes, a serious, thoughtful candidate. And I think that I'm that person, and I would very much appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Those are our candidates for the 48th district. Now let's move over. Let's give them both a round of applause. And now let's move over to the 45th district. JinYoung.
Well, all growing up, in middle school and high school, I was like the one kid, who did lacrosse, the one Asian kid who was in ASB leadership, and so I am so thrilled to see so many Asian Americans in this room. So thank you so much for coming here. Throughout my professional experience, I've had the honor of serving with a nonprofit in Africa. I've had the honor of working in government and seeing what works and what doesn't work firsthand, and also in technology in the private sector. And I want to bring those skills of bringing people from all different parts of our society together to come up with solutions, because I think what we're seeing at the national level is that extremism on both sides is what's deteriorating our democracy. And we need more people like the late Senator Andy Hill, who proved we can build a compassionate state government that also lives within its means. And that's the kind of balance and moderation that I want to bring to our state government. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And Manka?
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here on a weekday. So, we all want local, experienced, professional leaders. Leaders who are interested in solving problems. And that is what I have been doing for our community for over 2 decades. And that's why I'm running, to make sure that we are solving the very real problems that exist in the state. And that starts by making sure we're governing. And what is happening in Olympia right now is not governing. We're going to do special sessions 3 times around. We're not able to pass a budget because we have the Republican majority in the Senate holding the entire state hostage. And that has to stop, because we really need to represent people and not political parties. And that is what you're going to get with me. Someone who's interested in solutions and making sure that everyone's voice is heard. And if we want a government to do its job, this one vote in this one election can make it so. Great. Thank you.
And let's give it up for the 45th District candidates. Welcome. So thank you, each and every candidate, for your candid and specific responses to the hard questions that we asked, including the ones that I asked. The candidates will actually stay. I hope it's okay that you guys will stay for another 15 minutes if anybody wants to come up and get a chance to personally meet them.
Can I ask the moderator a question?
Uh-oh.
When are you running for office?
We thank all of you in the audience for joining us this evening and informing yourself so that when you mail in your ballot on November 7th, by November 7th, I should say, before then, your voice is going to be that of an informed and educated voter. That's what we wanted to achieve tonight, and we thank you, every single one of you, for being here and being so attentive and paying attention. I was impressed by the amount of attention, I hope you guys were as well, that everybody here displayed. So we very much appreciate that. Give yourselves a round of applause. And then, let's give a big thank you to the organizers, volunteers, and all 16 of the sponsoring organizations. If we can even have the organizers maybe come up here so they can get a round of applause. Let's get them up here. Yeah.